is told from her vantage point. For today, the next 3 Sundays, and Christmas Eve, we will be looking at Christmas a different way. We will be looking at the nativity story from Joseph's perspective, using Pastor Adam Hamilton's book, Faithful, Christmas Through the Eyes of Joseph. Some of the words in these 5 messages will be mine, and some will be the words of Pastor Hamilton. But the inspiration for this sermon series is his book. No man played a more important role in Jesus' life than Joseph. Though not his biological father, Joseph adopted Jesus as his son. Joseph protected him, provided for him, taught him, and mentored him. We don't often hear about Joseph because there's relatively little information about him in the Gospels. They contain only a handful of stories about him around the time of Jesus' birth, and a couple of references to Jesus as Joseph's son later in the Gospels. Gospel of Mark doesn't mention him at all. You won't find anything about Joseph in the Acts of the Apostles or in any of Paul's letters. So we will have to read between the lines to fill in the picture of Joseph's life. And to some extent, we must use our imagination to connect those bits of information we do find in the Gospels. As we do this, we will find that there's more than meets the eye in the New Testament accounts of Joseph's life. Though the story of Joseph has insights for everyone, I believe it will speak in particularly important ways to fathers, husbands, stepfathers, grandfathers, and any other men who had the opportunity to teach, mentor, or care for others. As we go through this sermon series, we will be examining these basic questions. What can we learn about God from Joseph's story? What can we learn about ourselves from Joseph's story? And how does Joseph shed light on the meaning of the Christmas story? Although some extra-biblical writings and early church traditions hold that Joseph was very old when he married Mary and had children from a previous marriage, it's far more likely that Joseph was a young man in his late teens when the nativity story occurred. If this is true, the brothers and sisters of Jesus mentioned in the Gospels were then the biological children of Mary and Joseph. They were Jesus' younger siblings. In our New Testament reading this morning, we read about the return of Jesus to his hometown of Nazareth, and some were offended by his teaching. They asked, "Isn't this the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother's name Mary? And aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas? Aren't all his sisters with us? Where then did this man get all these things?" Mary is named in the passage, as are all the brothers. The sisters are not named, but they are mentioned that they were living in Nazareth. Joseph, the earthly father of Jesus, is not named, probably indicating that by the time Jesus was at this point pursuing his ministry, Joseph had died. Nevertheless, Joseph's occupation was remembered, and it was mentioned that he was a carpenter. People expressed surprise at Jesus, and not in a good way. There was a perceptible tone of derision when they asked, "Where did he get his wisdom? Where did he get the power to work miracles? Isn't he the carpenter's son?" It almost seems that by mentioning his father's profession, that they were trying to discredit Jesus, saying in effect, "How can a lowly carpenter's son have such wisdom and power?" What does it tell us about God that he chose Joseph to serve as the earthly father of Jesus and to raise him as his own son? Why didn't God choose a priest an educated scribe or lawyer, a physician, or maybe a successful businessman? Why did he entrust this job to a humble carpenter? You may remember the story from 1 Samuel, in which God sent Samuel to Bethlehem to anoint one of Jesse's sons to be the next king of Israel. Jesse brought out the oldest, tallest, strongest, and most handsome of his sons. And Samuel thought he must be the one. But God said, no, not that one. Jesse repeated this with all but one of his sons. After God had rejected all of these sons, Samuel asked, do you have any more sons? Jesse replied, there was one more, his youngest son David, who was out tending the sheep. Samuel demanded to see David, and when David was brought in, God said to Samuel, he's the one. God then told Samuel, the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. In the end, the chosen one was by outward appearances the least impressive of Jesse's sons, the youngest, the scrawniest. With Joseph, God continued that pattern, looking at the heart and choosing an unlikely hero for the important mission of raising the Messiah. Only 16 verses in the Bible mention Joseph by name, but I believe his influence was much stronger and wider than you might guess from those few passages. Reverend Hamilton says, I would argue that almost everything you read in the Gospels about what Jesus said and did was shaped, at least in part, by Joseph. Fathers play an important role in shaping our lives. For some of us, that role of father was powerful, positive, and encouraging. For others, it may have been difficult and painful. However, our fathers shaped and influenced us. We are their children in ways we may not fully realize. We learn a lot from observing our dads. As we look back, many of the good things that happened in our lives are because of a dad or stepdad. I suspect that some of us may have also learned from them some things we did not want to be or do. After losing my father in 2018, I spent a lot of time reflecting on what he meant to my life. There were a lot of great memories, some personality attributes I don't think I appreciated enough, as well as a few things I wish had been different. But it was all important in making me who I am today. Though the Gospels provide very little direct information about Joseph, I believe we can learn a lot about him by looking at his son. Reverend Hamilton wrote, as I read the stories of Jesus, it appeared to me that Joseph was intentional about teaching and modeling for Jesus what God is and what God's will was for his life. When Jesus told the parable of the prodigal son, likening God to the patient and merciful father who took his son back even after the boy had demanded his inheritance in advance and then squandered everything on wild living. Had Jesus seen this kind of love and forgiveness by Joseph in response to one or more of his brothers? When Jesus spoke about the importance of telling the truth, might he have been describing what he had learned by watching Joseph? When he taught his disciples that true greatness is found in humble service, might he have been describing what he had seen in his father's carpentry work every single day? When Jesus said we're not to look at a woman with lust in our hearts, was he repeating what he had learned from Joseph as a teen? Doesn't that sound like something a father might tell his son when he's 13 or 14? When Jesus said we should treat others the way we would want them to treat us, Is it possible that he had grown up seeing this value embodied in his earthly dad, both in Joseph's business and his personal life? When Jesus said that we should treat others the way, why is that in here twice? Interesting. I repeated a paragraph. Must be it's an important one. Jesus undoubtedly learned many things from his mother, but I have to believe that much of what we see in Jesus reflected the life, witness, and example of Joseph. When I think about Joseph's story, what strikes me is that the person whose birth we celebrate at Christmas was in large part influenced by his human father, or stepfather, or adopted father, or foster father. Each of these terms might fit. It seems likely to me that Joseph intentionally taught and modeled love, faith, and fatherhood. And that what we learned, and that what Jesus learned from him, shaped his life and his ministry. How do others see Jesus and Joseph in you? How are you shaping the children entrusted to your care? These might be your own children or your own grandchildren. If you don't have children or grandchildren, these could be nieces or nephews, young people in the workplace or in your neighborhood, children in Sunday school. It's an important question for all of us, but I think it's particularly important for men. What are you teaching about life to the children who look up to you? What image of God are you painting for them? When you are gone, what will your children and grandchildren or other children say they learned from you? What lessons will they continue to carry with them? I've worn a few different hats in my life. I worked hard every day at all the drugstores I managed. And I've always taken my role of pastor very seriously. But it's when I wear my dad hat that maybe that's when I'm making the most difference. I'm blessed with 4 grown children who are hardworking, caring, and trustworthy. I'm very proud of the men and women they have become. I willingly give most of the credit to Betsy, who is an absolutely phenomenal mom. But I hope that through my love, my example, that maybe I contributed something too. Each of us can discover in Joseph, the man who goes unnoticed, a daily, discreet, and hidden presence, an intercessor, a support, and a guide in times of trouble. Joseph reminds us that those who appear hidden or in the shadows can play an incomparable role in the history of salvation and in the lives of people. None of us has been asked to take on the monumental task that Joseph did in raising the Messiah. But every mother, father, stepfather, grandma, and grandpa, aunt and uncle has been asked to raise children of God, to show them a picture of God's love and mercy, and to teach them intentionally what it means to be a person of faith. And when we do that, we follow the example of a righteous and good man. Joseph of Nazareth. Amen.